The last witness will be Dr. Robert George, Commissioner, United States Commissioner on International Freedom. Dr. George, your full testimony will appear in the record, and you can proceed as you see fit. Just one second. Okay, good. Dr. George, you may proceed. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Wolf. I'm delighted and grateful to have this opportunity to appear before the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission on behalf of the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom. If you'll indulge me for a moment, though, I'd like to begin just with a brief personal remark, and that is to thank you for your very kind message to me on my appointment to the Commission. You have been an inspiration to me in my 20 years of work in the human rights field, fighting for religious freedom and other human rights for people of all faiths and people in all lands. And in that way, of course, you're very much like Tom Lantos, for whom this committee is named, who was a warrior for religious freedom and many other human rights for all people in all lands of all faiths. It's a particular pleasure, I should add, Chairman Wolf, for me to be serving with Katrina Lantos Sweat, the daughter of the late Congressman Tom Lantos. And just as you and Congressman Lantos worked across the lines of party division to work together in the great cause of human rights, I'm working with Katrina in the same way, and it's lovely to have the opportunity to work with her in that way. I should also add, as you know, I have some experience working in government agencies, and I've been delighted to find that the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom is served by an absolutely first-rate staff and is doing wonderful work. So I am very appreciative of the opportunity to serve on the Commission. I'm one of its newest members, but I am serving very enthusiastically. The Commission has testified before Congress on Vietnam numerous times over the past 7 years. Each time, Chairman Wolf, we have hoped to bring news of dramatic changes and improvements, of greater respect for universal human rights, above all the great right of religious freedom, the lifting of draconian controls over free expression, freedom of association, freedom of religion, and an end to the silencing by the government of dissent. Sadly, though, we cannot report such changes. We cannot report them today, just as we have not been able to report them for the past several years. In fact, Vietnam has gone backward rather than forward for the past several years, and religious freedom conditions remain very poor. I understand that Mr. Posner described them as having deteriorated. That is certainly the information that we have at the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, and we're very, very concerned about it. The United States-Vietnamese relationship has grown in recent years, as you know, but this growth has not brought the improvements that we need and that the people of Vietnam deserve in religious freedom and other human rights. The government of Vietnam continues to control all religious communities in some manner. All religious communities. Buddhist, Catholic, Protestant, other. And the government actively suppresses independent religious practice and detains individuals viewed as challenging its authority, particularly those who are publicly advocating for fewer religious freedom restrictions and a greater scope for the free exercise of religion. Religious activity continues to grow in Vietnam. And the government has made some important concessions in the past in response to international pressure, including, and I would single this out in particular because of its significance, the 2004 designation of Vietnam as a country of particular concern. That designation worked. It was later lifted. The government is now backsliding. Individuals continue to be imprisoned for engaging in independent religious activity and religious freedom advocacy. New converts to ethnic minority Christianity face discrimination, harassment, and even forced renunciations of their faith. Religious communities face violence from the police and from contract thugs, including Catholics who are abused, mistreated for peacefully protesting land disputes, and forced disbandment of the Plum Village Buddhist order. The most severe violations that we have learned about target the Unified Buddhist Church of Vietnam, independent Hoa Hao and Cao Dai groups, ethnic minority Protestants in the central highlands of Vietnam and in the northwest provinces, and ethnic Khmer Buddhists in the Mekong Delta. Now, just in the past year, there have been over a dozen new arrests of ethnic minority Protestants and Catholics and 2 Hoa Hao activists who met with the Commission back in 2009. Violence continues to occur, targeting Catholic communities who protest land confiscations and Hmong religious gatherings. Relations between Catholics and the Vietnamese government, particularly clergy and laity affiliated with the Redemptorist religious order, have deteriorated very significantly in recent years. Peaceful protests in land disputes, property disputes, and prayer vigils to honor detained human rights defenders have led to violence by police and over a dozen arrests of protesters, nonviolent protesters. Ethnic minority Protestants continue to experience campaigns of forced renunciation of faith, and these focus both on independent religious activity and on new converts. Father Nguyen Van Ly was also returned to prison last year after being given medical parole. Father Ly is back in prison. Now, there's not enough time here to fully detail religious freedom conditions in Vietnam, but deteriorated is the right word. The longer version of my testimony, Mr. Chairman, will include more information. Also, the Commission's 2012 annual report provides much detail about restrictions and abuses faced by religious communities of all persuasions in Vietnam, and I will submit a copy of the Vietnam chapter with my testimony for the record. Now on to some recommendations. Our Commission is far from alone in our conclusions about religious freedom conditions in Vietnam. They are shared widely by members of Congress in both parties and Vietnamese Americans, such as those you just heard on the panel, and others committed to advancing the cause of human rights and religious freedom for the people of Vietnam. They're also shared by people in the administration. Secretary of State Clinton, has stated publicly that Vietnam and the United States have distinct differences in the area of human rights. She has expressed, and let me quote her, her concern about the arrest and conviction of people for peaceful dissent, attacks on religious groups, and curbs on internet freedom, unquote. And she has said that if the United States and Vietnam are ever to develop a strategic partnership, quoting again, Vietnam must do more to respect and protect its citizens' rights, unquote. The Commission on International Religious Freedom very strongly shares those sentiments of Secretary Clinton. The United States government has political leverage and diplomatic resources that need to be deployed to advance the cause of religious freedom for the people of Vietnam. The question, Mr. Chairman, is whether or not those resources will be deployed. We are here to say they must. We believe that CPC designation, Country of Particular Concern designation, is warranted for Vietnam given the facts that I have described briefly for you this morning and that are described at length in our annual report. That CPC designation worked to the advantage of the freedom of the people of Vietnam when it was used previously from 2004 to 2006. It produced tangible improvements without hurting progress on other bilateral issues. The Vietnamese government released some prisoners and loosened some controls over religious freedom, and trade, humanitarian programs, and security cooperation, far from deteriorating, actually improved. It turned out to be a win-win situation. But CPC status was lifted, and the situation went the wrong way. We believe that a CPC designation will once again, as it did from 2004 to 2006, produce tangible improvements if it is used the way the International Religious Freedom Act intended it to be used. The idea that vigorous human rights diplomacy will hurt progress on other bilateral interests certainly fails the test of historical facts. Now, passage of the Vietnam Human Rights Act. In addition to CPC designation, the administration and Senate can demonstrate its commitment to human rights in Vietnam by signaling support for the passage of the Vietnam Human Rights Act. Our commission supports this bill and hopes it will be discussed, considered, and passed during the current session of Congress, and we hope by bipartisan support. We believe that both the CPC designation and the Vietnam Human Rights Act are powerful tools available to the United States to spotlight abuses of religious freedom and related rights, to encourage future improvements, and to clearly signal that the United States is on the side of those in Vietnam, the many in Vietnam, who seek to advance both the prosperity of their nation and fundamental human rights, beginning with the right to religious liberty. The Obama administration's newly unveiled East Asia policy, the so-called Asia Pivot, offers an opportunity for the United States to demonstrate that our interests in human rights and religious liberty are pursued in tandem with our interests in trade and security. A CPC designation for Vietnam would convey that message. Any expansion of U.S. economic or security assistance programs in Vietnam should be linked, must be linked, with human rights progress and with the creation of new and sustainable initiatives in religious freedom and programs in non-commercial rule of law and civil society development. Mr. Chairman, Vietnam and the United States share a unique and all too tragic history. Our engagement is no longer one of bullets and bombs, but of ideas and institutions. The Vietnamese leadership, out of practical necessity, abandoned, for all intents and purposes, its Marxist economic ideology, and now simply clings to political control. The same vigilance and pressure that dragged Vietnam onto the path of a market economy now need to be applied to weaken the government's grip on totalitarian authority and to end its silencing and abuse of dissenters and its repression of religious communities. U.S. policies and programs should reflect this goal and stand firmly with those peacefully seeking greater freedoms and guaranteed rights in Vietnam. Our diplomacy really needs to send a clear message, and that message is that United States interests in Vietnam are not merely economic, but affirm the universal desire to which our nation is committed to speak freely, to worship without fear, and to organize openly and to come into the public square as religious people without suffering persecution. This is a message that will be heard when and if it is delivered clearly by the government of the United States, and it will give hope to the millions of suffering Vietnamese people. If I can go off script just to end, Mr. Chairman, the people of Vietnam have suffered for too long, and it's time that their cries are heard. They deserve the same fundamental freedoms that we enjoy in the United States and that we propose as universal human rights, beginning with the right to religious liberty. We can make a difference. We did make a difference from 2004 to 2006. It's time to learn from history, to do the right thing, to signal to the people of Vietnam that the American people are on their side. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. George. I want to thank you for your testimony. I will put your entire testimony in the congressional record, too, as with the other witnesses, because members are just beginning to come back into town, so everyone has that. It's there for history. Secondly, I appreciate your willingness to serve and Tom Lantos' daughter willing to serve. I think you really will make a tremendous addition. Tom Lantos was a giant on these issues. Whenever there was an issue like this on the floor, it'd be Lantos, Hyde, Lantos. It was like the team, and Mr. Lundgren has always been part of that team too, but they were the giants. And I see some of that dissipating from the Congress. I see it evaporating from this administration. I pray for the days of a Reagan administration whereby people advocated and stood with the dissidents and did that. And I think, but two of you on this commission, I think, will elevate it, and I think it demonstrates, as Mr. Hyde and Mr. Lantos, or Mr. Lantos and Mr. Hyde, that it's a totally bipartisan thing. There's no partisanship here, so I appreciate that. I also want to just say I appreciate the great work you used to do with Chuck Colson.
Thank you.
One of the giants. With the passing of Chuck Colson, I just wonder who will fill that role. But I just appreciate that. I watched the interview that you and Chuck did at Princeton on ethics and
Doing the right thing.
Doing the right thing. So I just appreciate that. We honor Chuck, but thanks for that.
Well, thank you, Chairman Wolf. Chuck was a great warrior for human rights, both at home and abroad, and he's very, very much missed already. But as with Tom Lantos and as with Henry Hyde, we have not only the memories that they leave, but also the great inspiration that they've provided to move forward.
Well, thank you.
And certainly our commission is absolutely dedicated to the cause that gave rise to the commission in the 1998 bill, International Religious Freedom Bill. And we mean to work in every way that we can to support those on the Hill who are willing to fight for religious freedom, and to do our part in making sure that the American people know what the facts are in the international sphere when it comes to the defense of this human right, which is the first freedom mentioned in our own Bill of Rights and among the foundational principles that we as Americans are committed to.
I'm going to recognize Mr. Lundgren first, but I just want to say Congressman Lundgren has agreed to sign a letter with us to the American ambassador asking that he go visit your husband and go to the prison and make an effort, even if he's denied, to continually show up, to make an effort, to get in his automobile and drive to the prison and to advocate. And so Mr. Lundgren and I will sign that letter together, and we'll kind of stay with you on that issue. And Michael Posner has agreed to meet. She's never had the opportunity to speak with the American ambassador. And so we will share that and work on that together. With that, I recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Lundgren.
I thank the gentleman. I thank him for having this hearing. And Mei Hung No, a constituent of mine, who has suffered much because her husband has suffered much and been so courageous, has never lost her faith in this country and our government to, as Dr. George said, do the right thing. There are times when there's reason for doubt, I suppose, but that's one of the reasons we have this commission, to make sure that we do what is right. As the gentleman mentioned, Mr. Lantos and Mr. Hyde and others, Jack Kemp and others, during the period of time when we were battling the Soviet Union, never took no for an answer. I can recall the protests that we made on behalf of Soviet Jewry, and many people asked why we were doing that. Wasn't it a waste of time? How could you have pressure on a totalitarian government? And yet we saw the results that were positive time after time. I think it's the same thing here. And yes, we will ask our ambassador to take a personal interest in this. We're talking about an American citizen. We're talking about a denial of basic rights. And it's something we've always stood for. It hasn't been partisan in the past. It shouldn't be partisan now. it should be something that all Americans fully support and fully recognize. So I am very grateful, Mr. Chairman, that you had this hearing, and I know the follow-up that you will do is indicated by the follow-up you've always done, and I will be proud to work with you on that. And I just want to say I appreciate Dr. George and the work he's done in so many fields, and this is just another one in which he's added his voice in the cause of doing the right thing. We may make mistakes. We do make mistakes. We're not infallible, but we never make a mistake by trying to do the right thing. And sometimes it's as simple as that. I think Ronald Reagan used to say that the fact is there are there are sometimes simple solutions to difficult problems. There are just no easy solutions to difficult problems. And oftentimes the simple solution is the toughest solution. And saying what's actually happening, putting honesty on the record, and standing behind it has always served us well, and it will serve us well in this case. And we will continue to fight. And I appreciate Mr. Wolf, and I will tell you, we have members of the other side of the aisle who support us in what we are doing. So this is not a partisan issue in any way, shape, or form. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. I appreciate your comments, and we will together, and we'll share the letters, and we'll share the letters with you. Dr. George, I had just one or two questions.
Sure.
You mentioned that when Vietnam was designated a CPC from 2004 to 2006, it made an effort to lift restrictions and curb abuses, but that when sanctions were lifted, the abuses continued and only increased. This is strong evidence that a CPC designation can have a positive effect in improving human rights and religious freedom for people in other countries. Did the administration give the Commission a specific reason why it could not designate Vietnam a CPC? And in your opinion, what is the State Department's reluctance in designating Vietnam as a CPC?
Well, we seem to have a bit of a disagreement about what actually constitutes a religious freedom violation, or particularly a systematic, egregious, and ongoing abuse of religious freedom. We certainly believe that the facts that I have laid before you this morning, and which are set forth in greater detail in the testimony that I'll be submitting and in our chapter, that those facts more than warrant CPC designation. The State Department so far doesn't see it that way, but we're certainly hoping that they will come around to seeing it that way, because the facts seem to us to be very, very clear. Now, sometimes you just have to do the right thing, and sometimes doing the right thing means learning from history. And we do know that from 2004 to 2006, we got improvements in human rights, and especially in religious freedom in Vietnam, without any cost to our other economic and diplomatic efforts. When we lifted CPC status, things started to deteriorate, to use that word from Mr. Posner again. Well, let's learn the lessons of history, and let's use this very effective tool again, and we believe at the Commission that it will have the same effect. Improvements for the people of Vietnam, which is what we want and what the State Department wants and what the Congress wants and what the administration wants. And as Congressman Lundgren says, this is not a partisan issue at all. So let's just do the right thing here. And we believe that doing the right thing means acknowledging these abuses, looking at these facts straight on, understanding that they constitute egregious, ongoing, systematic abuse of religious liberty, and use this designation.
Well, on that strong answer, I think we're just going to adjourn the hearing. I think this hearing has made the case without any question, without any doubt, and certainly in a bipartisan way. And I know Mr. McGovern shares the same concerns. So we will continue to press the Lantos Commission, members on both sides, Congressman Lundgren, for the administration to do that and to do it as quickly as possible. And with that, I thank all the witnesses for testifying. Your full statement will be in this record, but also will be in the congressional record for all members to see. And with that, we adjourn the hearing.
Thank you.